Have you ever looked at your life and wondered why it began the way it did? Why some of the most sensitive, aware, deeply feeling people were born into families where love didn't feel safe, where there was tension, control, silence, or even emotional neglect, manipulation, or abuse. And sometimes, something even harder to face: being hurt or betrayed by the very people who were supposed to provide love, safety, security, and protection. Where something inside us, even as children, quietly knew, this doesn't feel right. Hi, welcome to my channel, where we gently explore spirituality, inner growth, reflection, and reconnecting with ourselves. For many of us, that question doesn't just disappear. Why this family? Why this environment? Why did love feel confusing instead of safe? And as we grow older, as we begin to reflect and become more aware, that question can feel even heavier, because we start to see things more clearly. We begin to recognize patterns. We begin to understand what we experienced. And sometimes, we begin to realize that what we went through wasn't just difficult, it was harmful. Some of us grew up in environments where love was conditional, where affection came with expectations, where approval had to be earned, where silence meant something was wrong, but no one ever spoke about it. Some experienced control disguised as care, guilt disguised as love, or emotional withdrawal used as punishment. And for others, it went further. Verbal abuse, being spoken to in ways that slowly break down your sense of self. Criticism that never seemed to end. Words that stayed with you long after they were said. For some, even physical abuse. Moments that were frightening, unpredictable, where safety didn't feel guaranteed. And even when those moments passed, something stayed. Because experiences like that don't just disappear. They leave emotional scars. They shape how we see ourselves, how we feel about love, how safe we feel being who we are. We're often told that these experiences simply hurt us. And they do. They leave marks. They shape how we relate to others, how we trust or struggle to trust. But there's another part that isn't always spoken about. Because when something feels wrong again and again, we don't just feel it. We begin to really see it. We begin to question it. And that questioning quietly changes something within us. People who grow up in stable, emotionally safe environments often don't need to question what love is. They experience it and accept it. But when love feels inconsistent, conditional, or unsafe, we don't have that same ease. We can't just accept it, because something inside us keeps noticing, keeps recognizing that something isn't right, even when everyone around us acts as though it is normal. And even if we try to ignore it, even if we adapt, stay quiet, people please, or keep the peace just to survive it, that awareness never fully leaves us. We can no longer unsee it. Something deep within us continues to feel that something is wrong. So we learn to survive it. We learn to adjust, to stay quiet when something feels wrong, to say yes when something inside us is saying no. We become hyper-aware, careful, always reading the room. Because the part of us that felt hurt, that felt unsafe, that didn't feel protected, was never fully seen, never fully understood. And that's where those deeper emotional wounds remain. Not just in memory, but in how we feel, react, and relate. Because when that kind of trust is broken at such a young age, it doesn't just stay in the past. It shapes our future and how safe we feel with people, how much we open up, how much we hold back. It makes trust feel difficult, sometimes even unsafe. And for many, that early betrayal doesn't just affect relationships. It affects us and our relationship with ourselves. But eventually, carrying all of this begins to exhaust us. Constantly adapting, constantly tolerating, constantly abandoning parts of ourselves just to survive environments that never truly felt safe. And at some point, something inside us reaches its limit. We become tired of explaining away behavior that hurts us, tired of pretending things were normal when they weren't, tired of carrying pain that was never ours to carry in the first place. And that moment can be deeply confronting, because suddenly, we begin to see everything clearly. The patterns, not just in our families, but in our relationships, in our reactions, in the ways we learn to stay safe. We begin to recognize how much we've been adapting, how much we've been tolerating, how much of ourselves we've been setting aside just to survive. And once that awareness fully lands, something changes. Because we can no longer keep abandoning ourselves in order to keep the peace. And when these experiences aren't understood, acknowledged, or processed, we often find ways to cope, sometimes quietly, sometimes in ways we don't even recognize at first. Distraction, avoidance, numbing, and for some, this can slowly turn into deeper coping patterns. Addictions, behaviors that help us escape what we feel, even if only temporarily. Sometimes trying to numb the pain, sometimes trying to silence emotions that feel too heavy to carry, and sometimes trying to fill the emptiness left behind from not feeling safe, not feeling loved, not feeling wanted, not feeling valued, not feeling enough. Trying to fill wounds that were created long before we even understood what was happening to us. Because pain that is never acknowledged doesn't simply disappear. It finds other ways to express itself. And here is the deeper truth. Even though it can be difficult to accept, many of the patterns we experienced didn't begin with us. They were often passed down through generations, from parents who were also wounded, who learned unhealthy patterns from their parents, and from grandparents before them. Pain, fear, control, emotional neglect, silence, dysfunction, passed from one generation to the next, often without awareness. Not because people consciously wanted to cause harm, but because many never learned another way. And this is where ancestral healing begins to come into the picture. Because at some point, someone has to become aware enough to stop the pattern from continuing. Not through blame, not through hatred, but through understanding. Through recognizing what was passed down, while also making the conscious decision not to carry it forward unchanged. And that can be painful, because healing often asks us to face things that previous generations avoided, denied, or buried. But this is how patterns begin to change. This is how cycles begin to break. Not only for ourselves, but for the generations that come after us. And this is where something else becomes important. Because those experiences didn't stay in the past. They live in the parts of us that learn to adapt. The parts of us that still feel unsafe, that still expect rejection, that still carry the emotional weight of what we went through. And along with ancestral healing, this is also where inner child healing begins. Not as something abstract, but as something very real. It's the process of recognizing those younger parts of ourselves, the parts that didn't feel safe, seen, or protected, and beginning to meet them with understanding instead of dismissal. Not rushing the process, not forcing it to disappear, but slowly, gently, creating a sense of safety within ourselves that wasn't always there before. Because many of the emotional wounds we carry don't just live in memory, They live in the younger parts of ourselves that learn to survive difficult experiences emotionally. And if this is something you're interested in understanding more deeply, I also have videos on inner child healing, as well as a guided inner child healing meditation here on the channel that you may find helpful. What you experienced was real. The confusion was real. The hurt was real. And none of it should be minimized. But the awareness that came from it matters, because it allows you to see what others might not see, to question what others might not question, and to begin choosing something different, not from fear, but from understanding. And healing doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen, or brushing it under the rug, or turning a blind eye to it. It means acknowledging the impact it has had, how those experiences have shaped us, shaped our lives, and the way we see ourselves and others. Because these patterns don't stay in the past. They show up in our relationships, in what we accept, in what we tolerate, in how we communicate, trust, and connect. They influence almost every area of our lives, often without us even realizing it. And when trust has been broken early in life, healing can also mean slowly learning that not everything is unsafe. That connection doesn't always have to lead to pain. And that, over time, it's possible to rebuild a sense of trust, not just in others, but within ourselves. And healing is the process of gently becoming aware of that, so we can begin to understand it, and over time, begin to change it. Until next time, love yourself deeply. If this resonated with you, do like the video and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy this kind of content, please consider subscribing. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. See you in the next one.